think what's happening in fintech in general is there's a fractionalization of the consumer into two neobanks that represent their interest. So in the old days, you had B of A, Chase, Wells, and others that were general purpose banks that would take all types of users. But there was nothing really special about how they treated doctors or how they treated gig economy workers. They were just, you're all the same. And what's happened is that the people that have those communities as their organization as part of their general day-to-day. So think of someone like MindBuddy or Care.com that have communities of people on their platforms doing other activities, like in MindBuddy or Care.com, maybe it's running a salon or it's doing nursing or nanny services and so forth. And all of these communities ultimately involve the exchange of funds between some sort of consumer and some sort of service person. And if you can actually become part of that experience and build a banking relationship with the recipients of both sides of the marketplace, you actually build a stickier relationship with your consumer. And I think the opportunity is for many, many different types of organizations, not just fintech companies, but basically any type of business can offer banking-like services to their consumer groups in different ways and shapes and forms. And you see this from Gusto and others creating deposit accounts for people that receive paychecks. So imagine you get a debit card sponsored by your company that you work for. And in retrospect, it's somewhat like what happened in the 50s and 60s, where all the big corporations in America created credit unions for their employees. And it's like that resurgence of create a community, capitalize on it, know something special about it, and do something different. For example, there's tons of fintechs trying to go after YouTubers because they're a great tight-knit community. They're generating lots of revenue. Do they really understand banking? Do they really know what they should do, how to save, and so forth? Not probably. And so there's a lot of opportunity there. And I think what we're finding in general is that instead of mass retail sort of driving most of the banking experiences for individuals, people are finding the bank, the neobank, that fits their needs and fits their interest. So there are plenty of people super excited about TreeCard, which is doing a bank for people that like the environment. There's a couple of fintechs we're talking to lately that are introducing fintech services for people that like pets. And if you think about it, a bank account for a pet owner by itself doesn't sound that attractive until you then couple it with better insurance rates, discounts at the various service providers, data analytics to say, I think your pet may be sick because you're spending too much money on food, blah, 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 blah. And this insight that happens in the vertical industry is supported by horizontal enablement with financial services, and that's where we can help. Biggest change that's happening is the speed of a transaction. And so the way I frame this is, in like the 1800s, people got paid annually, right? And you sort of trued up with your feudal lord and, you know, were grateful, and you paid taxes once a year at Christmas time or something like that. And then with the 50s and 60s and the invention of the mainframe, we got paid monthly. And you had general ledgers and systems keep track of payroll. And then sort of in the 70s and 80s, we moved to twice a week or twice a month type of, every 2 weeks or twice a month type of payroll. And then it kind of stopped. At Uber, we actually pioneered same day payment. So you could pay yourself 5 times a day with a real-time payment. And the reality is the loaning of your dollars, which is your personal time that's being sold to your employer, the gap between working 2 weeks or 3 weeks in arrears is shrinking. And you see that this across the board in consumer dynamics with their employer or the marketplace they work on. You see it with restaurants and other people that want faster access to the settlements from American Express or Visa or MasterCard. Imagine, like, you know, the Squares of the world creating a very successful business of, we'll let you cash out your earnings, but you pay us 1.5% to do it real time, as opposed to waiting 2 days for having over ACH. So I think time is shrinking, which is really interesting. And with that, we're finding clunky parts of particularly the US financial system, which is very batch oriented and very slow and has crazy things like, you know, at the end of a business day, no more transactions till tomorrow morning. And you see this and you're just like, why? And there's no one really got a great rule other than that was kind of how it made sense when we were doing batch settlement in the 60s and 70s when all these systems were designed. So speeding things up, real-time payments, real-time integrations, real-time money flow is where I think the biggest change is occurring. And what that does is it creates new opportunities at the consumer level to think about budgeting and planning. Because just because you have the money in real time doesn't mean you should spend it. And so we've got a lot of societal things to think about of not allowing people to get out ahead of what they should do from a financial plan perspective, but at the same time doing it in a learning way as opposed to a didactic or paternal type of way, if that makes sense. When I was at Yodlee, we would see, we powered a bunch of FinTechs back in the 2000s. And you would see people coming out with the latest budgeting app or the latest P2P app or something like that. And there would be sort of like a swarm migration of consumers from one to the next, to the next, to the next. I think what we see a lot of in Gen Z is very cash centric. So not in the sense of paying with cash, but living around their balance, not going into debt, not doing credit as much, because there's a lack of understanding of should they or why should they. And then this is sort of turning around and realizing that you can't get a mortgage when you want to buy a house because you've never had credit before. And not because you couldn't get credit, you just didn't want to get credit. And so there's some interesting dynamics there that's happening that we need to start thinking about from an education perspective. I think they are completely intolerant of time delays. So the fact that the bank theoretically closes Saturday and Sunday is irrelevant to the Gen Z. They just want to spend whenever they need to. And so real time becomes really critical, and access to their money, and they should feel like they can move it whenever they want to. Definitely is top of mind. And then the other thing that I think is quite interesting about Gen Z, or even the previous folks, is the reality that many folks are lined up around the idea of not having one form of income, that they're actually quite comfortable having 2 or 3 gig jobs or different sorts of part-time work and so forth. And that feels natural to them. It doesn't feel unnatural. Like when I was growing up, you got a job at a corporation and that was kind of what you did. And now people are saying, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do my Etsy work Monday and Tuesday. And then on Wednesday and Thursday, I'm going to go do some work helping my friend do a startup. And then on Friday and Saturday, I'm going to hustle and do Uber driving or something like that. And it's not considered negative. It's just considered normal. They need some sort of place to store their balance. That's the entry point, like a deposit account, whatever you want to call it. That's the basics. There's a natural continuum after that of needing some sort of lending. So lending becomes the next thing, whether it's just even an overdraft or buy now, pay later, maybe a credit card or credit builder, that sort of service. The next evolution of that is you get to thinking about the privilege of saving, because realize for many people, the idea of saving is like an unobtainable goal. So you've got to be careful about how you position saving as a thing. And then there's a more interesting variation of saving, which is investing, which is taking money that you don't actually need to live on and applying it into a more aggressive strategy than just hoping it grows at 0.5% in a savings account. So investing becomes the next continuum, and you've seen the Robinhoods of the world come into those markets. I think the simplified investing with sort of themes or robo-advising, whatever you want to call it, will become common table stakes next year in FinTech. And then InsurTech is probably the most challenging area to jump into from a consumer perspective. There's definitely folks that are doing great products like Lemonade and others, but fractionalizing that and launching it at the individual consumer level. So how does Pet Bank or Tree Card offer insurance to their customers? I think it's going to be a later next year thing. And part of it's because there's a high beta of insurance, so it's a little riskier product to offer. And part of it's also the FinTechs learning their relationship with their customers and earning the privilege to say, let me help you with the insurance of something. I don't think we'll get into health insurance sold through retail banking anytime ever soon. But the final sort of frontier of prop tech, I don't see it as a mass retail problem. I think there's different sort of universe of players that participate, which is not traditionally sold through the community banks relationship. Brick and mortar has some advantages, particularly when you get to document heavy processes like mortgage lending and stuff like that. But mortgages happen once every 20 years for most people. So it's not like a very repeat operation. And so I think what's definitely happened during COVID is there's a provable use case of buying things online, which requires controls and spending limits and so forth. And I think you've seen a lot of the really successful startups in the child or student funding and transaction management really growing really well, like Greenlight and Step, who have said, look, we can help you as a parent look after funds, teach your kids how to manage their spending responsibly. And because people are buying stuff online, like whether they're playing games on Roblox or on Fortnite, there's a ton of really interesting learning opportunities there that have happened that I think have all been compounded by the fact that we've all been stuck indoors with our children or with our families, and thinking like, how do we help them grow and evolve? And like, you know, the days are gone where you used to walk into a branch with mum and dad and you got your checking account. And I mean, God help me, I got a passbook when I first got a bank account, and that thing was like super old school. That's not happening anymore. People are doing this all digitally. And as a result of it being digital, then it means brands that connect to you digitally, whether you're a YouTuber or a TikToker or whatever, your ability to create a relationship with them and launch and get a bank account in a relationship financial services way is so low friction now that the reality is I think a lot of people will end up with multiple bank accounts. Some will have more activity than others. And at some point, someone will come along with an app that helps you keep track of all of your bank accounts everywhere. Oh, wait, I did that.